In 1913, the average American worker could buy a man's suit for $15. That same $15 today would cover a decent pair of socks. But what if I told you that wasn't quite true? What if the system quietly transferring wealth from your paycheck every single month wasn't an accident of economics, but a design feature? What if the very people who created our monetary system understood exactly what would happen and built it that way on purpose? Today, we're going to trace the exact moment this machine was turned on, who built it, and why after more than a century, most people still don't understand they're caught inside it. Because once you see how this works, you can't unsee it. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to a world that operated on completely different rules. For most of human history, money was simple. A gold coin was valuable because gold itself was valuable, scarce, durable, divisible. You couldn't just create more of it by decree. If a king wanted to fund a war, he needed actual gold in his treasury. If he didn't have it, he couldn't spend it. This created a natural limit on government power and spending. By the late 1800s, most developed nations operated on what's called the gold standard. Paper money existed, but it was merely a receipt of promise that you could exchange it for actual gold at any time. In the United States, you could walk into a bank with a $20 bill and demand $20 worth of gold. The system had a built-in anchor to reality. But there was a problem, at least from the perspective of government and large banks. The gold standard was rigid. It prevented governments from spending money they didn't have. It made borrowing expensive. It restricted the ability to stimulate the economy during downturns by simply creating more money. And most importantly for our story, it made it very difficult for wealth to be quietly transferred from savers to borrowers, from the middle class to those with first access to newly created money. Some very powerful people wanted to change that. And in 1913, they got their chance. November 22, 1910, a private railway car departed from New Jersey under cover of darkness. Inside were 6 men representing approximately 1/4 of the world's wealth. There was Senator Nelson Aldrich, whose daughter had married John D. Rockefeller Jr. There was Frank Vanderlip of National City Bank, Henry Davison of J.P. Morgan and Company, Charles Norton of First National Bank, Benjamin Strong, also of J.P. Morgan, and Paul Warburg, a German immigrant and partner in Kuhn, Loeb and Company. Their destination, Jekyll Island, Georgia, a private club owned by some of America's wealthiest families. For 9 days, these men worked in complete secrecy. They even used first names only so the club staff wouldn't recognize them. What they were crafting would become the blueprint for the Federal Reserve System, the central bank that would fundamentally alter how American money worked. Here's what most people don't understand about what happened next. The Federal Reserve Act, passed by Congress in December 1913, did something revolutionary. It separated the dollar from its gold anchor, not immediately, but gradually. It created a system where a private banking cartel could create money, lend it to the government, and charge interest on it. Congressman Charles Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous aviator, saw exactly what was happening. On the House floor, he declared, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary power will be legalized." But here's the key insight that connects to our modern reality. The Federal Reserve was given the power to expand and contract the money supply. And when you expand the money supply, you don't create wealth, you dilute the value of existing money. Every dollar already in circulation becomes worth less. Think about it like this. Imagine there are $100 in existence and 100 apples to buy. Each apple costs $1. Now imagine someone with a printing press creates 100 more dollars and spends them first before prices adjust. They get to buy apples at $1 each. But now there are $200 chasing 100 apples. The price rises to $2. Everyone who held onto their original dollars just lost half their purchasing power. They didn't spend foolishly, they didn't make bad investments. The rules changed underneath them while they slept. This is called the Cantillon Effect, named after 18th century economist Richard Cantillon. Those closest to the money creation banks, financial institutions, government contractors spend the new money first, at yesterday's prices. By the time that money reaches ordinary workers through wage increases, prices have already adjusted upward. Wealth flows uphill. For the first few decades, the system operated somewhat restrained. The dollar was still technically convertible to gold, at least for foreign governments and central banks. This created a check on how much money could be created. But then came World War II, and everything accelerated. Wars are expensive. The US government needed to spend unprecedented amounts of money. The Federal Reserve obliged by keeping interest rates artificially low and buying government bonds, essentially creating money to fund the war. The money supply exploded. After the war, in 1944, world leaders met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and established a new global monetary system. The US dollar would be convertible to gold at $35 per ounce, and all other currencies would be pegged to the dollar. This made the dollar the world's reserve currency, a position of enormous privilege and power. But there was a problem brewing. The US kept spending more than it had on social programs, on the Vietnam War, on the space race. To fund this spending, the Federal Reserve kept creating more dollars. But the gold in Fort Knox wasn't increasing. Foreign governments started to notice. France's President Charles de Gaulle was particularly astute. In 1965, he called the system America's exorbitant privilege and began demanding gold for France's dollar reserves. Other countries followed. Gold started flowing out of the United States at an alarming rate. By 1971, President Richard Nixon faced a crisis. Foreign governments held more dollar claims than the US had gold to back them. The jig was up. On August 15, 1971, Nixon appeared on television and announced that the United States would temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. That temporary suspension is still in effect today, more than 50 years later. In a single evening, the last thread connecting the US dollar to physical reality was severed. For the first time in human history, the world's dominant currency was backed by nothing but faith in the government that issued it. The dollar became what economists call fiat currency, money by decree, by government proclamation alone. The consequences were immediate and dramatic. Within 2 years, inflation surged into double digits. The 1970s became characterized by stagflation, rising prices combined with economic stagnation. The purchasing power of the dollar went into freefall. But here's what's crucial to understand. This wasn't a bug in the system. This was the system working exactly as designed. Without gold as a constraint, the Federal Reserve could now create unlimited amounts of money. Every dollar created diluted the value of every existing dollar. Savers, people who worked hard, spent less than they earned, and put money aside were systematically punished. The value of their savings eroded month by month, year by year. Meanwhile, those who borrowed money benefited enormously. They borrowed dollars when they were worth more, then paid back the loans with dollars that were worth less, the biggest borrower of all. The US government, inflation became a hidden tax, a way to reduce the real value of government debt without ever having to formally default. Let's look at the actual numbers, because this is where the story becomes undeniable. In 1971, when Nixon closed the gold window, the median home price in the United States was $25,000. Today, it's over $400,000. That's a 16-fold increase. But did houses become 16 times better? Did they gain 16 times more bedrooms? No, the money changed. In 1971, a new car cost about $3,500. Today, the average new car costs $48,000, 14 times more expensive. College tuition. In 1971, the average tuition at a four-year public university was $1,410 per year. Today, it's over $10,000, and that's just for in-state public schools. Private universities can exceed $60,000 annually. Here's the disturbing part: wages haven't kept pace. In 1971, the median household income was about $10,000. Today, it's roughly $75,000. That's only a 7.5-fold increase. Everything got more expensive faster than people's paychecks grew. The result: the average American is working harder for less. In 1970, a single income could support a middle-class family. Today, two incomes barely suffice. The promise of the American dream, work hard, save money, buy a house, retire comfortably, has become exponentially more difficult to achieve. But it gets worse. The inflation statistics the government publishes significantly understate the real decline in purchasing power. In 1980, the government changed how it calculated the Consumer Price Index. Then it changed the formula again in 1990, and again in the late 1990s. Each time, the new methodology made inflation appear lower than it would under the old calculation. Why? Because many government obligations, Social Security, pensions, inflation-adjusted bonds are tied to the official inflation rate. Every percentage point they can shave off the CPI saves the government billions in payouts. Independent economists who calculate inflation using the pre-1980 methodology estimate that real inflation over the past decades has been running at roughly double the official rate. Now, here's where the story becomes urgent, because we're watching the exact same pattern repeat but faster and more extreme. In 2008, facing a financial crisis, the Federal Reserve did something unprecedented. It dropped interest rates to nearly zero and began quantitative easing, a euphemism for creating trillions of dollars out of thin air to buy government bonds and mortgage-backed securities. The money supply exploded. From 2008 to 2020, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet grew from under $1 trillion to over $4 trillion. Then came 2020 and the COVID-19 pandemic. The money printing went into hyperdrive. In just 2 years, the Fed created more new dollars than had existed in the entire economy. In 2008, the M2 money supply, a broad measure of dollars in circulation, increased by 40% in 2 years. 40% in 2 years. The result? The highest inflation in 40 years, but this time, it happened even faster. Housing prices surged 40% in many markets between 2020 and 2022. Used car prices jumped 50%. Grocery prices increased 20 to 30% depending on the item. And once again, the Cantillon Effect played out perfectly. Those with asset stocks, real estate, businesses saw their wealth soar as all that newly created money flowed into asset prices. The stock market hit record highs. Bitcoin surged past $60,000. Real estate became unaffordable for first-time buyers. Meanwhile, workers on fixed salaries and retirees on fixed incomes watched their purchasing power evaporate. A recent study found that despite nominal wage increases, real wages adjusted for actual inflation declined for the average American worker in 2021 and 2022. The wealth transfer was massive and swift. The richest 1% of Americans gained $6.5 trillion in wealth during the pandemic. The bottom 50% actually lost wealth in real terms. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was monetary policy working exactly as the system designed in 1913 and unleashed in 1971 intended. Create money, give it to those connected to power and finance first, and let the wealth flow uphill while ordinary people wonder why everything keeps getting more expensive. So what does all this mean for you? 3 critical takeaways. First, saving in cash is a guaranteed way to lose wealth over time. The system is designed to punish savers and reward borrowers, specifically the biggest borrowers like governments and corporations. Every year you hold cash, you lose to 3% minimum in real purchasing power, and often much more. Your emergency fund is necessary, but any wealth you want to preserve must be held in assets that can't be inflated away: real estate, stocks, commodities, or other stores of value. Second, the official inflation numbers are worse than meaningless. They're designed to obscure reality. If your personal experience is that things are getting much more expensive much faster than the 3% the government claims, trust your experience. You're not crazy. The calculation methodology is deliberately designed to minimize the reported number. Plan your financial life around real inflation, not the government's version. Third, understand that this is a wealth transfer mechanism, not an accident. When you hear that the Fed is stimulating the economy or providing liquidity, translate that. They're creating money that will flow to banks and financial institutions first, bidding up asset prices, and will eventually dilute the purchasing power of every dollar you earn and save. You're not failing to keep up because you're not working hard enough. You're running on a treadmill that's speeding up. The machine built on Jekyll Island in 1910 and fully unleashed in 1971 is still running. Every second, it is transferring wealth from those who work and save to those who borrow and control the money creation process. The question is, now that you see it, what will you do differently? Because here's the uncomfortable truth: this system won't change until it breaks completely. And when it does, those who prepared will preserve their wealth. Those who didn't will wonder what happened. The choice is yours. If this video opened your eyes to how the monetary system actually works, share it with someone who needs to understand this. Subscribe for more deep dives into the financial systems that shape your life without your knowledge. And leave a comment. Did you notice the wealth transfer happening in your own life? What year did the math stop working for you? The machine runs whether you understand it or not. But understanding it gives you a chance to get off the treadmill. I'll see you in the next one.